Both home buyers and sellers became more active in the month of April, as we saw both the pace of sales and listings in Metro Vancouver increase relative to March. So what exactly is happening in the market and how is this impacting prices? I'm Adina with Adina YVR Vancouver Real Estate Group and Oakland Realty, here with your May 2026 market update. Let's jump right into the numbers and take a look at what's happening. In the month of April, we had just over 2,100 home sales registered on the MLS. This is an increase of 4% relative to March, yet it's down 2.5% relative to this time last year, and it's 23% below the 10-year sales average for the month of April. Looking at this by property type, we see that the largest increase was in the detached home segment, where we had 659 homes sold. This is an increase of 15% relative to March, and it's an increase of 14% relative to April last year. For attached townhomes and duplexes, we had 433 homes sold. This is a decrease of 3% relative to March, and it's a decrease of 2% relative to April last year. And for apartment condos, we had 1,009 homes sold in April. This is an increase of 1% relative to March, and it's a decrease of almost 11% relative to April last year. On the supply side, we had almost 6,700 homes newly listed for sale on the MLS in the month of April. This is an increase of 15% relative to March, yet it's down 2% relative to this time last year. Compared to the 10-year sales average for the month of April, we're up about 15%. This brought our total inventory levels back up to 16,236 homes in total listed for sale on the MLS in Metro Vancouver. This is up 10% relative to March, it's flat relative to this time last year, and it's up 38% relative to the 10-year sales average for the month of April. So with an increase in the pace of sales and active inventory, how is this impacting prices? Well, if you recall, our leading indicator showing us if prices are on their way up or down is our sales to active listings ratio. And simply we're looking at the number of sales in a given month divided by the active listings left over at the end of that month. When this ratio is above 20% for a sustained period of time, we see upward pressure on prices, and that's when we're in a seller's market. And when this ratio is below 12% for a sustained period of time, we see downward pressure on prices, and that's when we're in a buyer's market. Anything in between is considered balanced market territory. And in the month of April, our sales to active listings ratio was 13.5%. So we're on the cusp of a balanced to buyer's market territory. And what we see when we compare this to previous months is that it is down slightly relative to March when it was at 14.2%, yet it's still much higher than it was in January and February of this year. And if we look at this compared to last year, we're right on par with where the sales to active listings ratio was April last year when it was at 13.8%. And what happened last year is that the ratio peaked in March and then it started to decline from April down to October. So the key to what happens with prices is going to be watching the sales to active listings ratio in the coming months. If it continues to decline, we'll likely also see price declines, but if it stabilizes or increases slightly, we'll likely see prices stabilize as we head into the summer. Looking at this by property type, we see that for detached homes, it was 11.3%, and this is relatively unchanged relative to March when we were at 11%, and it remains in buyer's market territory. For attached townhomes and duplexes, the ratio is 15%, which is in balanced market territory, yet it's down about 2% relative to March when it was at 17%. And for condo apartments, the ratio was 14.7%, which again is down about 1% relative to March when it was 15.7%, yet it remains in balanced market territory. So let's take a look at prices. The HPI composite benchmark price for all property types across Metro Vancouver was $1,098,000. This is down 0.6% relative to March, and it's down 6.9% relative to April last year. Looking at this by property type, we see that for detached homes, the benchmark price was $1,840,700. This represents a decrease of 0.8% relative to March, and it's down 8.3% relative to April last year. For attached townhomes and duplexes, the HPI benchmark price was $1,043,400. This represents a decrease of 0.4% relative to March, and it's down 5.1% relative to April last year. And for condo apartments, the HPI benchmark price was $703,000. This represents a decrease of 0.5% relative to March, and it's down 7.9% relative to April last year. And the general trend we're seeing in this market now, which I've mentioned in previous months, is that there's a lot of variance across property types and neighborhoods. And we're seeing some listings that are coming onto the market and they're either selling really quickly or they're sitting on the market and taking their time. So now more than ever, it's really important to understand what's happening in your specific neighborhood and your property type. If you're thinking of buying or selling in this market, the key to having a successful plan is having the right strategy and the right information on what's happening. If you're thinking of making a move and would like to discuss your options, you can schedule a consultation by clicking the link below if you're watching this on YouTube, or you could click the link in my bio if you're watching this on Instagram. And in the meantime, to stay updated with what's happening in the market, you can subscribe here on YouTube or follow me on Instagram at adina.yvr. That's it for this month, and I can't wait to see you in June.